In this lesson, we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations using the zero product property. Okay, so zero product property says that if you have A times B, one number times another number, then either A has to be 0 or B has to be 0. Okay, so for example, if you had 3 times 0, okay, equals 0. So for our answer to be 0, either A or B would have to actually be 0, okay? So the same is true when we are multiplying quantities. If I have x plus 3 times x plus 2, then either x plus 3 has to be equal to 0 or x plus 2 has to be equal to 0 in order for all together to be 0, okay? So the idea of zero product property is based on the idea that if a factor, some number, times another equals 0, then one of the factors is equal to 0. Okay, so just what the example is above. So let's try and do, I'll do 3 of these with you, and then we'll finish the rest of them in class. Okay, so I know that the first part could be equal to 0. X plus 5 equals 0. Okay, and then the other one is x plus 2 is going to be equal to 0. And then we just want to solve for x in both. Okay, so here x is -5. Or, in this case, x is -2. Okay, so we have two answers. X is -5 or -2. Okay, let's do another one. Here the first term, x minus 6 is equal to 0. And the second one, x minus 3 is equal to 0. Solve for x in both. Here I have x is 6. And x is 3. Okay, so 6 or 3. Alright, so please pause the video and try number 3 on your own. Okay, so what you should have done here is x plus 7 equal to 0, and then also x minus 2 equal to 0. Okay, so solving for x on both sides, I get x is -7, and here I get x is equal to 2. Okay, the next one, number 4, is a little bit different because we just had x times x plus 6. So x is still the first term, it's just x equals 0, and the other one, x plus 6 equals 0. Okay, so here I already have x alone, so I'm done already. Then I need to subtract 6 on this side. Okay, so here x is 0 or -6. Okay, so what I'd like you to do in class is finish the rest of these, and then we will check it as a class. Okay, so moving on to example 2. So we're going to try and use this property that we just talked about to solve quadratic equations. Okay, this is only going to work when a is equal to 1. So what I mean by that is a, which is right here, is this term. It's just 1x squared. Okay, so it will work in this case. So the first thing we want to do is factor this trinomial that we see here. Okay, so factoring, we have to think back to chapter 9, factor the trinomial. Okay, so we want to think of two numbers that add up to 6 and the same two numbers that multiply to 8. Okay, so let's think about first the two numbers that multiply to 8. Would be 4 times 2. Oh, and actually 4 plus 2 is 6. Okay, so then I know that I can factor this to become x plus 4, because it's positive 4, times x plus 2, which is equal to 0. Okay, so now I have something that looks like example number 1. So I now have two equations here, x plus 4 equals 0, and x plus 2 is going to be equal to 0. Okay, so solving for x, here x is -4, and here x is negative 2. Okay, so I have two answers here. So step number 2, what did I just do? I used zero product property. Okay, and then I solved for x. Alright, so what are the x-intercepts of the parabola? Okay, so well, we found out that x is equal to negative 4. So that means that x is always negative 4. So in this case, y is 0. Okay, remember when we solved for these and we wrote them like negative 4, 0? So we're doing that again. And then also negative 2, 0. So now that I have my x-intercepts, I can label them on my graph. Okay? So then here I have negative 2, 0 and negative 4, 0. Okay, I'm just going to do that part right now. So I've finished solving the equation, but now I want to finish my graph. Okay, so remember that you need the x-intercepts and you also need to find out what the vertex is. Okay, so we know that because it's a positive, it's going to be opening upwards, so we need to find the minimum. Okay, so in order to find the line of symmetry, we use the equation x equals negative b over 2a. Okay, so now I have negative 6 over 2 times 1, which is negative 3. Okay, so now that I have solved for x, which is negative 3, I'm going to plug it back into my equation to get out y. So here I have y is equal to, instead of x squared, I'm going to plug in negative 3 squared plus 6 times negative 3 plus 8. Okay, so negative 3 squared is 9. 6 times negative 3, negative 18, plus 8. So y is going to be equal to negative 1. 9 minus 18 plus 8 is negative 1. Okay, so this is my vertex point. Okay, x is negative 3 and y is negative 1. So let me find negative 3, 1. Negative 3, negative 1 is right here. And actually, sorry guys, this is negative 4, 0. Not the blue one. So I'm going to change everything to red. Okay, so we're just looking at the red here. Okay? So now I can use the pattern also to finish the parabola. Okay, so remember that when we start here, we go out 1, up 1. The next one will be out 1, up 3. And then out 1, up 5. Because it's just x squared. Okay, so we're using the standard. And I can complete my graph. Alright, so then the last question in this section asks us, how did these answers compare to the answers you found algebraically? Okay, so basically the graph, if we look on the graph, it's the same thing. If I would have just started out by starting with the vertex and going over 1, up 1, I would still get the same 2 points of these x-intercepts that I would have. Okay, so it is exactly the same. So you can do it both ways. Okay, so I'm going to do one more part A with you here, and then I'd like you to pause the video and do part B and part C on your own. Okay? So what we need to do here to use zero product property is to first factor, okay? So I need to factor x squared minus 8x minus 48. So I need two numbers that add up to negative 8 and that multiply to negative 48. Okay, so I can start listing them. 24 times 2. Okay, that's not going to help me get to 8. What about if I did 12 times 4? Okay, now one of them has to be negative because it's negative. So if I do negative 12, I can do negative 12 plus 4, and that will give me negative 8, okay? So the two numbers I'm going to use here are negative 12 and 4. So I'm going to write it as x minus 12, because it's negative, and x plus 4. And these are both going to be equal to 0. Okay, next up is setting each equal to 0 and solving for x. So x minus 12 equals 0. Solving. So here x is 12. And the next one, x plus 4 equal to 0. X here is negative 4. Okay, so the last step then would be writing as the coordinates of the x-intercepts. Okay, so you're going to write it as 12, 0 and negative 4, 0. Okay, so these are the 2 points where the parabola crosses the x-axis. Alright, so let's pause the video and I'd like you to try part B and part C on your own. Alright, let me erase this to get a little bit more room. And let's go to part B. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add up to 5. Okay, so I can think right off the top of my head, 6 times negative 1, and then 6 plus negative 1 would give me 5. Okay, so I have x plus 6, x minus 1. Setting both of them equal to 0, and solving for x. X minus 1 is also equal to 0. So x here is equal to 1. Okay, writing them as the x-intercepts, I have negative 6, 0 and 1, 0. Okay? Alright, I'm going to erase this part here as well and move on to the last one so you can check to see if you got it correct. Okay. So this one is a little bit different because we first have to set it equal to 0. Do you see how A and B are already equal to 0? So in order to do that, I can add 36 to the left, and then I'll have 0 on the right. So now I'll have x squared minus 12x plus 36 is equal to 0. Okay, so that was one extra step that we needed to do here. Okay, so now again I need two numbers that add up to negative 12 and multiply to 36. Okay, so I can think of 6 times 6 is equal to 36. Okay, but I need the number to add up to negative 12. So if I do negative 6 times negative 6, we have 36, and then negative 6 plus negative 6 will also work. Okay? So then my two equations, or I'm sorry, my two parentheses are going to be x minus 6 and x minus 6. Okay? So now I've factored, and now I have to set each equal to 0. X minus 6 is equal to 0. So I'm going to add 6. X is equal to 6. Okay? If I do the same to here, I'm going to get the same answer. I'm going to get x is equal to 6. Okay? So in this case, I only have one x-intercept. Okay? I only have the x-intercept of 6, 0. Okay? And that's okay. It just means it crosses the x-axis one time. Alright, let's go ahead and move down to example 3. Okay? So still staying on the same idea of zero product property, here what we're going to do is we just have a binomial. We only have x squared and 4x. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to factor it. Okay, but factoring a binomial is different. We factor using the greatest common factor, okay, because it's not a trinomial. It's a little bit different. So I want to think about, what do x squared and 4x have in common? They both have an x. So if I take out the x, what I have left in the first term is x, and the second term is 4. Okay, you can always double check. X times x is x squared, and x times 4 is 4x. Okay? Alright, so now the next step is just to set each one equal to 0. So the first term, x is equal to 0, and then the second one, x plus 4 is equal to 0. Okay? Solve for x. X is negative 4 here. Okay? We already have solved for x over here. X is 0. Okay, so you have two of them here, two intercepts. Okay, so filling in for the steps, let's go ahead and look what I did. So I factored out the greatest common factor, then I set each part equal to 0, set each equal to 0, and then solve for x. Okay? Alright, so I'd like you to pause the video for a moment and try A, B, and C on your own. Okay, so for part A, we can factor out x, and we'll have x minus 6 left over. Each part is equal to 0, and solve for x. Okay, so x is 6, or 0. In the second one, I can factor out x, set each part equal to 0, and solve for x. Okay, so x is 0 or negative 8. Okay, in the next one, I do have coefficients here, so I want to see if I can also take out a number that's in common. But here I can't because it's just 2 and 3. So I can still only take out an x. I'll have 2x plus 3 left over. First term equal to 0. And second equal to 0. Solving here, I get that 2x is equal to negative 3. Divide by 2. So x is equal to negative 3 over 2. Or 0. Okay? Alright, so this whole lesson was about zero product property and trying to set each part equal to 0 after factoring.